First of all, I think the movie was a great PR makeover for Barbie. I
Mm.
think prior to the movie, she was very much a lightning rod. You either loved her or hated her. It was very hard to sort of be indifferent or neutral. And so I think that, fabulous makeover and sort of rebranding her. I think people who are very resistant to Barbie, I think walked away with a different opinion that she really did stand for feminism, which is why she was created in the first place. For female empowerment and just, empowerment in general, that you can do and be anything you want.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcast. Happy summer season. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby, aka Andrew, and I am so excited for you all to listen to what I hope you'll find to be a really enjoyable episode. So, before the episode begins, I just want to remind you all to please follow us on our YouTube channel, Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Make sure you rate us on Apple and give us a review. It really means a lot. You also can rate us on Spotify. If you need help doing any of that, as always, you can feel free to reach out to me, DM me on any of our social media accounts. I'm looking at them every day. Patreon, we have ad-free episodes and bonus content, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and you get a 1 week free trial. So, without further ado, here is today's Ivory Tower Boiler Room episode. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I'm really excited to have a repeat guest. This time, still talking about an incredible entrepreneurial woman, but as she's told me, she's going a little outside of that genre. So we'll talk about that journey. But I'm joined with author Renee Rosen. She is the USA Today bestselling author of Fifth Avenue Glamour Girl, The Social Graces, Park Avenue Summer, Windy City Blues, White Collar Girl, What the Lady Wants, and Dollface. And now we can add to the resume, Let's Call Her Barbie. So, welcome back to the show, Renee.
Thanks for having me back on.
So, when you came on the show and talked all about your inspiration for Estee Lauder and Fifth Avenue Glamour Girl, I remember you talked a lot about just how that subject found you and captivated you. And I know at the end of your book, you have a series of interview questions you answered, which I loved reading. And you talk a little about how Barbie entered your life with Ruth Handler's story. And contrary to public opinion, and I know you've been on the road a lot with book clubs and promoting, I'm sure so many ask you, oh, it must be because of the buzz of the Barbie film. And actually, this is a story that begins way before the Barbie film for you. So, like, can you talk a little about how this entered your life?
Yeah, as you said, people assume that I sort of jumped on the Barbie bandwagon. This book is so very different from the movie, I should say. And it was 2019 when I first got the idea to write this book. I was on a panel about feminism with a woman who's very high up in the doll division at Mattel. And we were having coffee, and she was telling me the story of Ruth Handler. And I just got goosebumps. And I knew then, right then and there, I have to write a novel about this. But I had two other books that were already in the pipeline. So by the time I was really able to sink in and start writing Barbie, all the movie hype had started. So there was a lot of FOMO going on. And it was just interesting timing.
Yeah, you said even that you thought about like pushing the publication to capture the Barbie craze. But like you said, I think you say Barbie is always timeless. Or,
She's evergreen, and it was more important to get the story right than to try and chase the moment.
yeah.
So
So, in your opinion, I'm assuming you saw the Barbie film.
3 times.
Okay. So, for you, what does the Barbie film capture? And Like, what has made it such a sensation in our pop culture?
First of all, I think the movie was a great PR makeover for Barbie. I
Mm,
think prior to the movie, she was very much a lightning rod. You either loved her or hated her. It was very hard to sort of be indifferent or neutral. And so I think that, fabulous makeover and sort of rebranding her. I think people who are very resistant to Barbie, I think walked away with a different opinion that she really did stand for feminism, which is why she was created in the first place. For female empowerment and just, empowerment in general, that you can do and be anything you want. Um, so I think, I think the casting, obviously Greta Gerwig, all that added to the cachet of the movie. And I think it was really well done. It was, certainly campy in places, but it was also really poignant. And, that monologue will live on forever. And, so I'm really curious if they're going to do a sequel. I
mm.
think there's too much money to leave on the table for them not to, but what and when and how that comes about, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, that'll be interesting. We'll see if your soothsaying power, Barbie 2, is around in the future. So, to leave the film, I think there is a powerful moment, though, where you've talked about there is one line in the film that inspired or you knew you had to add that element into your novel. Like, are you able to reveal there's the line that Rhea Perlman as Ruth Handler
Oh, I
said?
actually had to change. I had there's a moment in the movie where I don't know what leads up to it, but Rhea Perlman turns and looks as Ruth Handler and she says, I am Mattel. And I had that line in my book. I'm like, okay, I better change that. So, but Ruth was the driving force of Mattel. She was Mattel. And the fact that she got sort of pushed out was really detrimental to Mattel because they did a lot of missteps around then.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
that was the line. That was the line. That was the only part that really there was crossover, and I thought, oh, I was surprised, frankly, that they even had a cameo of Ruth in there. Although I don't know that people who knew Ruth would have seen Rhea Perlman's character as Ruth Handler.
mm.
Ruth didn't even know where a kitchen was, let alone, I don't think she ever made tea for anyone. She was not that kind of girl. And she wasn't as soft spoken as Rhea Perlman was.
Mm. Yeah, you're right. Rhea Perlman is the hostess with the mostess.
Yeah, she was
Which,
gentle and very, yeah, people who either really know their Barbie history or actually knew Ruth Handler were a little like, what? Other than Rhea Perlman being petite, which Ruth was, they didn't see the Ruth Handler that they knew and captured there.
so,
Rhea
going, yeah, no, I love Rhea Perlman. So going into Ruth Handler, like, what do you know the general public? We have such an image, and you've already touched upon it. There's the lightning rod, there's the, like, 1970s, is Barbie a feminist? And like, there gets a lot of debates on, you know, does she actually represent a false image of femininity? Is this an ideal body that is created just for male consumption, right? Like, that's kind of the gist of more of a Gloria Steinem type argument. But, you know, what was it for you? Like, talking to those, specifically the woman you mentioned from Mattel, at a feminist conference, or that's the panel. Like, did you already kind of start thinking about those debates, or like, how did the debates enter into your narrative?
Well, I mean, first of all, I never thought of Barbie in those terms. I mean, I was a serious Barbie player. I just loved Barbie because she unlocked my imagination. I think I became a writer because I played with Barbie. So I wasn't really conscious of that. I knew it had to be addressed in the book, and I tried to show it from all aspects, from the women's movement, from the male point of view, um, from a little girl's point of view, the mothers, who were threatened by her. Um, but I think that, the creators of Barbie, at least Ruth Handler and Charlotte Johnson, who was the head designer, they never intended for children to try and turn themselves into a Barbie. Like that was the furthest thing. Like, no, you're not supposed to look like this. You're supposed to play with it. It's a doll, it's a toy. Nobody wants you to look like Raggedy Ann or Mrs. Beasley, you know. So why Barbie had that weighted down on her, I'm not really sure. And one of the things that I think people would be interested in when they read the book is to find out that Barbie's measurements were not driven by some misogynistic fantasy. It's all about the wardrobe. It was about making the clothes. She had to have an abnormally thin waist in order to make the clothes look right on her. Same reason she wears a size 3 shoe. If Barbie had the equivalent of a size 7 shoe, she would look clown-like. So, there was a lot of optical illusion at play that ended up, you know, getting slapped on, getting a label that she was bad. She was a bad influence. She was a bad role model. And not that Mattel did everything perfectly. These are the geniuses that came up with Growing Up Skipper, which was a doll that you cranked her arm and she sprouted breasts. I mean, that didn't win any points with the women's movement.
So Ruth grows up in Denver and this works, she's also from a Jewish family and works for Paramount Studios first.
Yeah.
So how did you, because I know you start with her in creation and like this, she notices a lack in the industry for dolls. Like that dolls are paper dolls or they're not really, like you said, yeah.
What she notices is a huge gender gap in the toy market, that, she has a son and a daughter. Her son has his choice of toy guns, trucks. He can play, with soldiers. He can do all kinds of things. Her daughter has one option, that's baby dolls. And as her daughter gets a little bit older, she has paper dolls, which are about as much fun to play with as a stick. So Ruth, being a businesswoman, because Ruth herself did not play with dolls. She didn't play with toys at all, which is ironic that she became a toy maker, but she recognized that gap. And, she wanted to fill that. She also, wanted to give young girls a way to look into the future and be more than, there was more to motherhood. There was more to being a female than motherhood. That we were capable of more than that. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but that was not, that we weren't done at that point.
Well, that's where Ruth herself is a very female, entrepreneurial, empowered person. Like to go to college in the 1930s as a woman, that's not common. And
Yeah.
it seems like she came from a family of very hardworking, intellectually driven people. Like, what did you learn about Ruth Handler's family, maybe even for research that was
Yeah.
interesting?
I mean, that's what made Ruth Ruth, was her family. She was the youngest of 9 children.
Wow.
Her mother did not speak English. Her parents were from Eastern Europe. They spoke Yiddish in the house. And by the time Ruth came around, her mother was really tired. And basically, not basically, she did give Ruth over to her older sister, Sarah, to raise.
Mm.
So that really hung over Ruth's head, that she wasn't wanted. She would go back to her mother's house where all of her siblings were. And it wasn't like, we're going to grandma's house. She knew, that's my mother. This is my sister. And there's bedrooms for everybody else, but there's no room for me. And, Sarah, her sister, was really her role model. And Sarah ran a drugstore and a business. And, that was all Ruth knew, was that women work. And from the time she was a little girl, she went to work at the drugstore, running the soda fountain in the back and all for her sister. And I think that Ruth really believed that she had to prove her value, her worth every day, or else she'd be given away. Her husband would give her, no, she wouldn't have any value. And I think that was the driving force behind Ruth. Very different than the driving force behind Estee Lauder,
Mm.
who grew up just wanting to be a household name. She wanted to be famous for the sake of being famous and really didn't care what she was going to be famous for. She failed as an actress and sort of wound up in the skincare business and the cosmetic business. But, there were very different drivers at play.
Well, and what do you think it is, because you spent so much time with these two powerhouse women, that like an entrepreneurial spirit, how do they they find a lack, or like you said, Estee, who just wanted to become a household name, but they do like eventually just go with their gut, like an entrepreneur, and say, okay, this doesn't exist in the market. I'm going to fill this void. And they take a lot of risks and chances. Like, do you
Oh,
feel that Estee or Ruth took more risks, or is a person who had more to lose?
Now that it's summer officially, you know what that means. Beach reads. Well, I have the perfect magazine if you just don't know where to begin when it comes to which books to add to your to be read pile. The Gay and Lesbian Review is an incredible magazine that features book reviews, TV, film reviews, and such well researched articles. It's all about LGBT arts and culture. Make sure you head to glreview.org and you're going to see they have other magazines as digital issues. Use the promo code ITBR Choice and you get a free issue of the magazine. Their new theme is the situation. And in this issue of the magazine, it's all about connecting the current political moment, which every day we know takes a twist and a turn, and how LGBT rights, it's not the first time, sadly, that they've been threatened in America. If you don't know, look up the Lavender Scare and McCarthyism, and you'll see that government employees who were found to be homosexual or suspected to be homosexual were threatened and fired, a lot of them, from their jobs. Also, there's an article about the Weimar Republic and censoring Magnus Hirschfeld's incredible sexology research in Germany. There's also an interview with the incredible trans writer and activist Jennifer Finney Boylan, whose book Cleavage just came out. And of course, the last issue was all about Dr. Jonathan D. Katz's first homosexuals exhibit. So I hope you enjoy your reading. And if you have any questions or you just want to gush about what you're reading in the Gay and Lesbian Review, please DM me.
Probably if you went dollars to donuts sort of thing, just dollar to dollar, it would have been Ruth, because she put the whole company on the line. But both women made sacrifices in their personal lives, in their families. Um, and both women just refused to take no for an answer. They impossible was not part of their vocabulary. They had very different ways of going about it. Um, I think Estee was more stubborn and more, if there was an obstacle in her way, and of course there were many, she would just find a way around it, over it, under, if there was any kind of a roadblock. And then you had Ruth, who was just really brash. They called her ruthless for a reason. She was tough. I think she was way tougher than Estee. And she really went toe to toe with all the men, very much like Helen Gurley Brown did with Hearst. That was another entrepreneurial woman. Although, Helen Gurley Brown, um, she went toe to toe with them, but she was very sly. She had this way of manipulating a conversation so that you would think you'd come up with the idea that she had actually planted in the meeting. So
Mm.
she was the velvet hammer, Ruth was the sledgehammer, and Estee was somewhere in between.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to figure out who's the Miranda Priestley of The Devil Wears Prada. But I think that's a whole different industry. But also, I think it's just so fascinating, Renee, how you've given voice to women who've created such iconic brands, but haven't been given their laurels. Like, men still unfairly get applauded for a lot of credit or, you know, have a lot of cachet, but women have been at the forefront of industries. It's just who's telling their stories. And is that something that you think about when you're writing, or do you have to like let that go while you're in that creative space?
I think I'm just more intrigued by the determination of these women who are underdogs. Helen Gurley Brown in Park Avenue Summer, for example, you know, everyone was betting against her. And she changed the face of women's magazines. When she took over Cosmopolitan magazine, they had never, they were getting ready to fold the magazine. And she turned it around. And, Estee just uh, really always found a workaround. She always found a way to make it work. And Ruth was just smart, really smart. She knew the business. She knew where to get people, how to get them to fall in line. And she wasn't afraid. Or if she wasn't going to show it.
Yeah. And I feel like, have you felt that from your investigation, your research, like with Ruth Handler, did her employees talk about in her in a negative way because she was so ruthless, or not even ruthless, but just was wise and had to make decisions for the bottom line? Did they unfairly stereotype her because she was a woman in the business?
I don't think it was because she was a woman. I think the people that worked at Mattel, depending on who you talk to,
Mm,
a lot of people, very different opinions of her. A lot of people really loved her, thought that she was kind and supportive and generous. Other people were like, she was just all business. She wasn't warm and fuzzy, and she wasn't so it really depends on who you talk to. Now, within the industry, I think she was really well respected by, FAO Schwartz and Sears and Roebuck and those, big toy retailers at the time. Certainly Disney, the people that ran the Mickey Mouse Club respected her, her ad agency, they knew she was calling the shots. Anyone who was doing business knew, Elliot's the artist, Jack is the genius, and Ruth is the one really running it all.
mm,
Uh, so I really think that the fact that she was a woman and sometimes had to take the freight elevator up to a meeting that was being held in a men's club that didn't allow women on the premises, all that sort of stuff aside, I think that if they knew her and they had done business with her, they knew that she was just as smarter than any man that they would encounter in business. And I think she really earned their respect.
mm,
But nonetheless, she was still a woman, and some men didn't know how to deal with that. Um, that's why they made her ride up in the freight elevator, thinking they could like. She was unflappable though. She was like, I'm not going to let that stop me.
yeah. Well, so something I found so fascinating preparing for my conversation with you is, not going to reveal spoilers of what happens in your book, but earlier is the Paramount Studios aspect, which, we start our story, you start us, I should say, you're the writer. You start our story a little later, like when Mattel has been found, like, well, the furniture company that she co-founds with her husband, and then it turns into Mattel when they bring on Howard, right?
Um, when they, well, what happened was, you know, Ruth and Elliot meet in Denver. They relocate to California, Los Angeles. She goes to work at Paramount. He's an artist. he's tinkering with this new kind of plastic called lucite in his
Mm.
friend's garage, who was Harold Matson. Everybody called him Matt. And Ruth really liked what they're making tchotchkes, and Ruth really liked them. And she said, "Keep going. I'll sell them." And she
Mm.
sells them so well that all of a sudden they have a company, they have a business on their hands, and they have to name the company. And so they take Matt and Elliot, Matt and Elle, you get Mattel. And so, that's where that part of it came from. And I wanted people to know that history. Um, but that, to me, that wasn't where the story really started.
Yeah. And what was Ruth doing at Paramount Studios?
She was a secretary. She was
Mm.
typing up scripts, and I can't remember which, there was a director that had sort of taken her under her wing, and she met like Lucille Ball and, various other celebrities. Um, but, people told her, "Oh, you can't get a job at Paramount." She said, "Want to bet?" And she did.
Yeah.
So, but that was so rude.
She met, like, anytime there was a challenge, she
Oh,
was going
yeah.
to clear the path.
Well, if you told her you can't do something, she was like, "Just watch me."
Hmm. Well, and that's that, like, to use a Yiddish term, the chutzpah. Like, she had
Oh,
chutzpah.
oh yeah.
Uh,
Which she lacked in height, she made up for in personality and in, guts and all.
yeah. So where does, without revealing a lot, but where does Ruth, and where you begin, we talked a little about, like, just she's noticing this lack of an actual doll that could have a wardrobe or accessories or something that's glamorous to play with. But like you even said, you played a lot with Barbies. I played with Barbies, and I loved when you talked about how you created storylines, because that's what I did too. I would like line the Barbies up and create a screenplay with them. Like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is the narrative. And like we were doing it in a different way. Like I wasn't as necessarily interested in all the different wardrobe changes. I was just more interested in them substituting real life scenarios. So, like, how do you think Ruth was, how conscious was she of the way that the Barbie doll could be used as a toy?
Well, I think that Ruth, and we should state Ruth had two children, her daughter Barbie and her son Ken, which is like big factor, but that's the truth. Um, and she recognized that little children want to be big children. Little girls play with their mother's lipstick, they put on their mother's high heels and clomp around. And she knew that. And she also knew that the money in Barbie was not going to be in the sale of the doll, it was going to be in the sale of her wardrobe. And different wardrobes lended themselves to you know, different play, different
Mm.
settings, different, um, and she just wanted there to be no limits on what you could create with this doll. You had your own experience of playing with Barbie. I had my own experience. Everybody did something different, and there was no limit. If you could imagine it, you could make it happen with Barbie. You could
Mm.
take a parquet tub of butter, an empty tub of butter, and make it a swimming pool, or a
Yeah.
hot tub for, I mean, it was just an unlocking of one's imagination, and still does for many, many adults who collect, and
Well,
really, it's a wonderful hobby for them.
yeah, and I think it's so interesting because I don't think I was the necessarily the ideal Barbie consumer because I was cutting up construction paper and like labeling it with my own. I was getting around the whole wardrobe idea, which maybe my parents kind of convinced me to do, but I'll have to ask them at another time because it started to get expensive to get
Yeah.
all
Oh,
the
yeah.
wardrobes. Yeah.
That was Barbie sold for $3. Her outfits, in the beginning were like $5 a piece. And that was a lot of money back then for a toy.
Yeah, that's the, like you said, that was the, like the cash cow was in the wardrobes, is in all the different outfit changes.
Yeah.
And
And we should point out that Barbie, some people might not realize this, was based on a German prostitute novelty gag doll for men.
I was recently watching Return to Oz and Nosferatu with my fiance, and I thought, wait, I just had on Broadview Press authors who wrote a vampire literature anthology and the iconic edition of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So I said to my fiance, you know what? I need to tell everyone who's listening to ITBR that BroadviewPress.com has everything from classic novels to discussions about vampire literature, vampires in film and TV, the philosophy of sports, Native American culture, horror. There is so much on Broadview Press's website. I urge you all right now, search broadviewpress.com. You will see that not only do they have books for college instructors, which if you do teach college, you better add them to your list because it's amazing, all the resources they have. But if you have just wandered around a bookstore or a library and thought, everyone always told me to read Moby Dick, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to fully understand it. Broadviewpress.com has you covered because they have amazing notes and sources to help you dissect that huge whale of a tale. See what I did there? I was just watching the Page Master, so there's a little Moby Dick reference. Head to broadviewpress.com, use the exclusive code they gave us, Ivory Tower, 20% off your entire order. Yes, your entire order. Enjoy your reading, and please reach out to me and let me know what you're reading from Broadview Press. I would love to share it on social media.
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA plus people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Build Lily. If you saw Build Lily, you saw Barbie side by side, you'd think it was the same doll. But Build Lily, you couldn't buy separate outfits for. If you wanted Build Lily, in her nighty negligee, and you wanted another Build Lily in her, ski slope bunny, outfit, you had to buy two different dolls. And Ruth was like, no, we're going to make this clothes. We're going to sell the clothes separately. So, so the clothes, that was what really brought in the big money.
Do you remember when Build Lily is invented?
It was back in the 30s. She started out as I think it was in the late 30s. She started out as a comic strip character in a tabloid magazine in Germany. And, she was just very risque. She was a gold digger. She was a prostitute. And she was so popular that they turned her into this three-dimensional doll that was sold in cigar shops and souvenir shops. And, people hung it on the back of their rear view mirrors. And if somebody had a bachelor party, it was like the number one gag gift that you gave. So she was really never, ever intended for children.
What color hair? What was her
She
features?
had blonde hair. There's also a brunette Build Lilies. But I'm telling you, if you looked at Barbie #1, which is the Barbie in the iconic zebra swimsuit, you looked at her and you looked at Build Lily, they are twins. You'd be like, what's the difference? So, And that's where, again, I don't want to give too much away in the book, but that Mattel gets in a little hot water for that.
Mm. Well, and I do remember when I was like looking into gender studies of Barbie, like that I think might have been like, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but there is like a dark history there
Oh,
of,
very. It's just a salacious character for men,
yes, yes,
and
yes.
and she had a very similar body to Barbie. The similarities are just,
Yeah, no, everyone needs to look up
yeah,
that.
go Google Build Lily and you'll know what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's so important to highlight the way that Barbie, the inclusive nature of like the company now. And like something, as I was reading your novel, I was struck with how much Barbie now, like that's the thing, right? When there's some American cultural icon like a Barbie, how it just has taken on multiple um definitions. Like it just has captured so many different communities. And there really is now a real even like I would call it a gay icon in a way of Barbie. Like drag queens dressing as Barbie. Or like is that something that I don't want to say from the beginning, but did you see anything with Mattel and like tapping into communities, like whether there was anything with, the gay community, or do you think like Ruth wasn't necessarily aware that this was also going to like resonate with those who didn't feel like they had a voice, who would use Barbie to speak to their own identity?
I'm sure that, the marketing geniuses at Mattel, are very conscious of who their markets are, their various segments. I don't think Ruth looked at it that way at that time. We're talking about 1959. I
Yeah.
think, her primary target was little girls. And, I think she just saw that opportunity, in the marketplace and
Mm.
said, there's a void there, because the baby boomers, after World War II, it was like, there's all these little girls and there's no toys for them. There's nothing for them. And so, she was very much a trailblazer in that regard, and if Ruth was the mother of Barbie, then Jack Ryan was certainly the father of Barbie. He was the head of research and development for Mattel. Ruth was not a toy designer. Everyone at Mattel said, you cannot do this doll. You cannot give a little girl a doll with breasts. It's indecent. And Ruth firmly believed in her vision, and she got Jack Ryan on board. And Jack was a hot mess, fabulous character to work with. I just loved working with him. Um, and people are surprised when they get to the end to find out how much of this is real, that it really happened. But yeah, I couldn't have made this stuff up. He was interesting, that's for sure.
Oh
But they
yeah.
were, hand in hand to create a doll that went, I think, far, far beyond anything that they could have imagined, which is one of the reasons why when we just got to talk about Jack. We have to. He's a huge
Yes,
part.
no, please. Yeah, he's such a
Okay.
huge part of the story.
So Jack Ryan is the epitome of a mad genius.
Mm.
And I'm not giving anything away because you learn this about him very, very early on. He was severely dyslexic. He goes to Yale, where he graduates without having ever read a book or a paper or anything. He gets hired by Raytheon, the aerospace giant. He's making Hawk and Sparrow missiles for the Pentagon. All this is happening before he gets lured away to become a toy maker. And Jack stands 5'5", 5'8" with his 3-inch elevator lifts, and he is just the heartthrob of Mattel. The women go just gaga for this guy. And he's always got an entourage of beautiful women around him, which his wife isn't crazy about. And his wife is also named Barbara. So Ruth's daughter is Barbara and Jack's wife is Barbara. So, that gets really confusing. But he when he goes to work for Mattel, um, you know, he throws out a salary of like $20,000. And this circles back to their expectations about Barbie. Um, you know, they said, we can't afford that. We're just a startup company. And Jack says, okay, well, just give me a royalty on every toy that we sell and a cut on my patents. And that makes Jack Ryan a really, really wealthy man. At one point, he's making more money than Ruth and Elliot. And that causes a lot of friction in the company, which is a big part of the story. You know, it's like a business caper of what happens when a company grows so quickly, goes public on the New York Stock Exchange, how all of that shaped Barbie and shaped the company and the future of these people, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I feel that it must have been really fun looking at a time where, you can have a toy industry just occupy so much of the public's attention, where I just think now we're in a time where unfortunately like toy companies have been shuttered, or acquisitions and mergers, and Toys R Us sometimes, like, it rarely exists, and if it does exist, it's like part of another store's, so like under a subdivision of the store. FAO Shorts has kind of shrunk and been moved. And what was it like actually being at a thinking and writing about a time that has kind of, I don't want to say it's left the stratosphere, but it really is very nostalgic. Like, it's not a period that we can readily see in our everyday life now.
It was so fun. The research for this book, I mean, it was truly a trip down memory lane for me. You know, I unearthed all my Barbies from childhood. Um, and I loved just every day when I sat down to write, just getting lost in that world. You know, the music of that time period, the fashion, um, the cars that were, around back then, just the office culture, both good and bad. I just found that all really fascinating.
Yeah. And do you feel like, because I notice you have a pattern, Renee, which is why I love your work, that you have a pattern of writing about, like, whether it be 50s, 60s, 70s, like a time where there was a lot of, um, whether it be social etiquette, or, a type of entourage, a coterie of people who all like were in the same circle. And now things have turned to such a social media space, which is like, always changing. You never really know who's in your space, who's watching what you're doing. Is there a reason why you do love going back in time rather than like looking at the current moment?
Um, I just, I'm sure the current history was not all that interesting to people in real time. You know, like even if you go back to the Gilded Age, which is a time period I've also written in, talk about etiquette, I think that was just commonplace. You know, some somebody's going to look back on how we go to an airport, just a simple trip, taking off your shoes, and think we're nuts, but that's become commonplace now. So I think it's much more fascinating to look back on something with, some distance to see the peculiarities, because I'm sure there are things going on that we do every day that someone 100 years from now is going to write about and go, God, they would talk into these boxes on their computers, and people wore little buds in their ears and walked around with phones. And, by then, who knows, we'll probably have chips in our heads or whatever. And just, but, I personally am drawn to the past, but there's also some contemporary stories that I'd love to tackle at some point.
Okay, well, I'm hoping you do. Because I feel like, yeah, talk about people looking back. I think this year alone, there's so much happening in the news that we're not going to talk about here, but there's going to be a lot that historians need to analyze.
Absolutely. And not forget.
And not forget, exactly. So, what are you, where after finishing Let's Call Her Barbie, which everyone definitely, get your hands on, or get your ears listening to the audiobook. What do you said to me that you're kind of going away from the historical biographical
Yeah.
fictional type of writing. So like where have you now entered? Like what imaginary world?
Yeah. So, I honestly, when I finished this book, I had a hard time letting go of the characters because I loved them so much. And I couldn't find another historical figure that had the recognition of Barbie or that felt as interesting to me.
Hmm.
You know, I'd already written about the people that I really have been intrigued by. And I couldn't find someone that either someone else hasn't already written about and done a beautiful job with, or, someone that really sparked my interest. But I wanted to stay in the historical space. So my here's my elevator pitch for what I'm working on now. I don't have a title yet, but it's the story in 1969, in August of 1969, a disillusioned housewife accidentally lands at Woodstock for 3 days. It changes the
Oh,
course of her life.
oh, I
So
love this.
so it's the core are all fictional characters, but lots of cameos. Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. The organizers of Woodstock, which almost didn't happen. And when it did happen, it had all the makings of a natural, of a disaster. There was no food, there was no water, there was an electrical storm. You had 500,000 kids when you were expecting 50,000. It was the fact that it came off without a hitch, basically, and very peacefully. It was a miracle and a slice in history worth taking a look at.
Yeah, so it sounds like the housewife is going to have her mind. There's going to be a lot of
You're going to see
uh
things for the first time.
yeah, like
Yeah,
ideas that she's going to confront that she might not have thought were going to come in front of her.
yeah.
So
She's
this
not.
sounds exciting.
She's
Oh,
not prepared for what lies ahead in 3 days.
I can't wait. Oh, Renee, this is wonderful. So, thank you for coming on. I always love talking with you and you being up for my questions. And, um, what I always think is fascinating too is I love that I get to talk to creative writers and, you know, ask you questions that I'm just having as I'm reading, which, you might not always expect the readers to have. And then, right, that's why each reader brings their own perspectives and their own baggage. Good baggage. Good baggage.
Yes,
But
good.
so how can everyone, Renee, follow you on social media and make sure that they get their hands on Let's Call Her Barbie?
So I'm on Instagram, Renee Rosen _, Facebook, Renee Rosen author. You can find me on BookBub and Goodreads and all that. And I should say that there are photographs in the back of the book that were shot exclusively for the book by Matthew Keith, who posts as Dolls on the Brain. He's a big Barbie influencer.
Oh,
And I list Barbie influencers in the back. So if you guys ever want to just take a break from the news and what's going on in your life and want a little escape, go follow their feeds. You will be charmed, I'm sure, because they make me laugh. They just make me smile and make me laugh.
well,
Uh, yeah, and the audiobook, Abigail Reno narrated it, and I think she just hit it out of the park. I think she did a great job. And I've had wonderful feedback on the audiobook. So on Libro FM.
wonderful, wonderful. So, and I love that you list the influencers. That means a lot, right? The social media community getting their due. That's very nice of you, Renee. So, thank you, Renee. I hope you all out there enjoy reading Let's Call Her Barbie. Not saying it has to be a summer read, but it is a good summer read. It's a great summer read. Yeah, by
It's a good
pool.
big pink cover.
I know. I mean, at the pool, it's going to have a nice reflective light. So very pretty. People are going to be attracted to ask you what you're reading. So definitely get your hands on it. And until next time, when hopefully we'll talk about what's going on in Woodstock with a housewife who gets lost there for 3 days. Um, thank you, Renee. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Okay,
Bye bye.
bye.